Welcome to Dreamland Sleep Stories. Take a deep breath, relax and listen to our story tonight. The Nordic Gods, Part 2. Subscribe to our channel to let the peaceful images and soothing sounds accompany you into a deep sleep. This episode picks up where the last one left off. Thor the mighty, invincible, strongest and most fearless of the gods, the thunder god, hadn't fully woken up yet, but he already felt something was wrong. He reached out to grab his hammer, which he always kept close by when he slept. He spent a long time searching with his eyes closed. He reached out to grab it, trying to get a hold of the familiar hammer handle. There was no hammer to be found. To open his eyes, he got up and sat on the bed. He got up. He walked around the room to get a better look at things. There was no sign of his trusty hammer. His hammer was nowhere to be found. Thor's hammer is called Jenny. It was crafted for Thor by the dwarves Brock and Dektri. If they hit something with it, it was destroyed. If he threw the hammer at something, it always hit the target and then flew back into his hands. He'd make it smaller and stash it in his clothes, or make it bigger again. The only issue with the hammer was that the handle was a little too short, meaning Thor could only swing it with one hand. The hammer kept the gods of Asgard safe from dangers from other worlds. Frost giants, trolls, giants and all kinds of other monsters were afraid of Thor's hammer. Thor was very fond of his hammer, and the hammer was nowhere to be found. When things don't go to plan, Thor's usual response is to ask himself if it's Loki's fault. Thor takes a moment to think. He doesn't think Loki has the nerve to steal his hammer, so he does the second thing he oft and does when things go wrong. He goes to Loki for help. Loki is clever and resourceful. Loki will give him some advice on what to do next. Don't let anyone know, said Thor to Loki. But the hammer of the gods has been stolen from Asgard. That's not good news, said Loki, frowning. Let me see what I can find out. Loki went to the temple of Freyja. Freyja was the most beautiful of all the gods. Her curly blonde hair shone in the morning light, falling over her shoulders. Freyja's two cats were roaming around the temple, keen to pull her carriage. She was wearing the Be Rising Star necklace, which was as bright and yellow as her blonde hair. The dwarves in the mountains had crafted it especially for Freyja. I was wondering if I could borrow your feather cloak, said Loki. The one that lets you fly when you wear it. No way, said Freyja. That's my most prized possession. It's worth more than the price of gold. I'm not letting you go around prancing around in it, pulling stupid pranks. I'm looking for Thor's hammer, said Loki. It's been stolen, and I need to find it. I'll get it for you, said Freyja. Loki put on his feather cloak and transformed into a falcon, soaring around. He flew over Asgard and into the heart of the land of giants, looking around and searching for something unusual. As Loki flew by, he spotted a huge grave below, with a troll sitting on it and weaving dog collars. It was the biggest and ugliest troll Loki had ever come across. The troll gave Loki a big grin and waved at him in falcon form. Loki, how are things going with the gods? Any word from the elves? And why are you here in the land of giants alone? Loki stopped and stood beside the troll. I've only got bad news from Asgard and the elves. Really? The troll inquired, and he let out a little laugh as if he had done something naughty and was therefore smug and clever. Loki knew that laugh. Sometimes he laughed like that himself. Just to let you know, Thor's hammer is missing, said Loki. Any idea what's going on there? The troll scratched his armpit and laughed to himself for a while. I might know something about that, he said, and then asked, how is Freyja these days? Is she still as beautiful as ever? If you like her like that, Loki said. Oh, I like her, the troll said. I like her a lot. There was a moment of silence, a rather disturbing silence. The troll put the dog collar he was holding down on top of the pile and started to make a new one. I've got Thor's hammer, the troll told Loki. I stashed it underground, pretty deep, where no one can find it. What even Odin knows where it is. I'm the only one who can get it back. I can give it back to Thor if you give me what I want. I can get the hammer back for you, Loki said. I can bring you gold and amber. I can bring you treasures beyond counting. I don't want that, the troll replied. I want to marry Freya. Bring Freya to me within 8 days. I'll bring back the hammer of the gods as a wedding gift. Who are you? Loki inquired. The troll smiled, showing his crooked teeth. Loki, son of Laufey, I'm so Rorem, king of the trolls. I'm sure we can come to an agreement, Thor, Loki said. He wrapped Freya's feather cloak around himself tightly, then spread his arms and flew up into the sky. From Loki's perspective, the world seemed quite small. He looked down at the forests and the mountains, which seemed like toys. And the goblins the gods faced were nothing more than minor issues. Thor was waiting for him in the middle of the gods' square. Before Loki had even touched the ground, he was caught in Thor's huge hands. What's up? You know something, don't you? I can see it in your face. Tell me what you know now. Loki, I don't trust you, and I want to know what you found out before you have the chance to start plotting. Loki was naturally conspiratorial, and he found Thor's anger and naivety somewhat amusing. Your hammer was taken by Rorem, the king of trolls, he said. I managed to persuade him to return it, but he wanted something in return. That sounds fair enough, said Thor. What was the price? Freyja's hand in marriage. He only wants one of her hands. Thor was feeling optimistic. After all, she had 2 hands, so maybe she'd be willing to give up one without too much fuss. I thought Ty did something similar. The whole thing, Loki said. He wants to marry her. Oh, Thor said. I don't think that'll go down well with her. Well, you can let her know the news. Since I don't have the hammer in my hand right now, you'll be more persuasive than I am. They went together once again to Freyja's shrine. I've come to return your feather cloak, Loki said. Thanks, Freyja said. Had you managed to find out who was responsible for stealing Thor's hammer? It was Solheim, the king of the trolls. I've heard of him. He's a nasty piece of work. What's his deal? What does he want in exchange? You, Loki said. He wants to marry you. Freyja gave a nod. Thor was relieved that she seemed to accept the idea without any difficulty. Put on your bridal wreath, Freyja, and pack your bags. You and Loki are going to the land of the giants, he said. We need to get this done before Solheim changes his mind. I want my hammer back. Freyja didn't say anything. Thor noticed that the earth seemed to be shaking, as did the wall. Freyja's to cat's me wed and hissed, then hid under a box of fur. Freyja's hands were clenched into fists. Her necklace, be rising fell from her neck and onto the floor. It was as if she hadn't known. She looked at Thor and Loki as if they were the most despicable and disgusting criminals she had ever met. Thor was relieved when Freyja started to speak again. What do you think I am? She asked in a quiet voice. Do you really think I'm that stupid? Do you think I'm so easily replaced? Do you think I'd marry a monster just to make things easier for you? If you really think I'm going to go to the land of giants, wear a bride's crown and veil, and put up with lustful monsters and actually marry him then? She was unable to continue. The walls started shaking again, and Thor was worried the whole temple would collapse in on them. Get out, Freyja said firmly. What kind of goddess do you think I am? But my hammer, said Thor. Cut it out, Thor, said Loki. Thor was quiet for a moment. They left the temple. She's stunning when she's angry, said Thor. I can see why the troll wants to marry her now. Let it go, Thor, said Loki again. The two of them got all the gods together in the great hall. All the male gods and goddesses were there, except for Freyja, who was still at her temple. They spent the whole day discussing and debating. It was clear that they needed to get their hands on Anjans on MJ Elmir, but how? Everyone made their own suggestions that Loki rejected them all. Eventually, Heimdall, the Siren god who watches over the world, was the only one who hadn't spoken. Heimdall had a view across the whole 9 worlds, and sometimes he could even see things before they happened. "What do you think, Heimdall?" said Loki. "Any ideas?" "I do," said Heimdall, "but you might not like them." Thor gave the table a good thump. "It doesn't matter if we like it or not," he said. "We're the ones in charge here. We're here to get back Mjolnir, and we're prepared to do whatever it takes. Tell us your idea. If it's good, we'll like it." "You won't like it," Heimdall said. "We'll like it," Thor interjected. "I think we should dress Thor up as a beautiful bride," said Heimdall. "Or put a beautiful, dazzling necklace on him. The be-rinsing hams will put a bridal wreath on him. Stuff his dress to give him a voluptuous goddess-like figure, put a veil on him, dress him in all the jingly metal stuff like the goddesses do, and bedeck him with all sorts of jewelry. People might think, well, first of all, they'll think I like wearing women's clothes. I can assure you that won't be happening. I'm not keen on the idea. I'm not going to wear a bridal veil. I don't think anyone thinks that's a good idea, do you? It's a terrible idea. Just so you know, I have a beard. I can't just shave my beard off." "Cut the noise, Thor," said Loki, the son of Laufey. "The idea is spot on. If you don't want the giants to invade Asgard, you could put on the wedding dress and the veil will hide your face and your beard." Odin spoke up. "That's a great idea. Well done, Heimdall. We need to get the hammer back, and this is the best way to do it. Goddesses, let's get moving with Thor's wedding night." The goddesses got to work preparing his clothes. Freyr, Frey, Sif. Around other goddesses, including Freya's stepmother Skadi, came to lend a hand. They dressed him in the most exquisite and beautiful clothes, the kind only a goddess of noble birth would wear on her wedding day. Freyr went to Freya and got the be-rising on necklace back from her, which she put on Thor's neck. Sif, Thor's wife, added her own gold jewelry to the mix. Meanwhile, I bought all her jewelry and hung it all over Thor, so that he looked radiant and sparkled in the candlelight. She also bought 100 rings, some red gold and some white gold, and put them all on Thor's fingers. They covered his face with a veil, so that from the outside only his eyes were visible, and the goddess of marriage, Thor, placed the glittering headdress on Thor's head. A bridal wreath, beautiful and dazzling. "I think there's something wrong with the eyes," said Val. "They don't look very feminine at all." "I hope not," muttered Thor. They looked at Thor. "If you pull the veil down, it'll cover your eyes, but you'll still be able to see out." "Do your best," Loki said. "I'll go with you to the land of the giants as your handmaiden." Loki then transformed into a beautiful young handmaiden, looking and sounding just like she did before. "There you go. How do I look?" Between breaths, Thor seemed to mumble something, but no one could hear it, which was probably for the best. Loki and Thor got into Thor's chariot, which was pulled by 2 goats called Toothcutter and Toothgrinder. They made their way through the sky, ready to get started. No matter where they went, mountains would split in half and the earth would burn beneath them. "I don't feel too well," said Thor. "Don't say a word," said Loki in his female form. "I'll handle all the talking. Do you remember that? If you say anything, it'll all go wrong." Thor let out a grunt. They touched down in a courtyard. There were several huge black-furred oxen standing quietly. Each of these oxen was enormous, bigger than a house. Their horns were wrapped in gold, and the whole courtyard reeked of their droppings. A loud voice came from the large hall. "Can someone please move them? Could someone please put some clean straw on the benches?" "What are you doing? Either get rid of it or cover it with straw, or just leave it there to rot. This is Freyja, the fairest thing in the world, daughter of Njord, and she's coming to us. She doesn't want to see this." There was a path in the courtyard covered in straw. Once he'd got off the chariot, Thor, who was disguised as Loki, the maiden's attendant, lifted her skirt to avoid getting mud on her clothes as she walked along the straw path. They were met by a woman of considerable stature. She said she was Solheim's sister. She bent down, pinched Loki's cheeks with her fingers, and then poked Thor with her fingernails. Is this the most beautiful woman in the world? I don't see it at all. And when she lifted her skirt, I could see that her ankles were as thick as tree trunks. That's the light. She is the most beautiful of all the gods. The young woman transformed into Loki replied, when she lifts her veil, I guarantee you will be bowled over by her beauty. So where is the groom? And where's the wedding party? She's so excited and struggling to keep her calm. As the sun was setting, they were led into the great hall where the wedding feast was to be held. What if he asks me to sit next to him? Thor whispered to Loki. Then you should sit next to him. That's where the bride is meant to sit, but he might try to put his hand on my leg. Thor whispered uneasily. I'll sit between you, Loki said, and I'll explain that's how we do it. Thor was at one end of the table, Loki was next to him, and Thor was on the bench next to him. Thor clapped his hands, and the huge servants came in. They brought 5 whole oxen, which was enough food for all the giants, and 20 grilled salmon, each as big as a 10-year-old boy. They also brought in dozens of small snacks and desserts for the women. Following them were 5 servants, each carrying a full barrel of mead. The barrels were so big and heavy that the giants holding them had to hold on to something to keep their balance. Solheim said, today's feast is for the beautiful Freya. But he didn't get a chance to say more because Thor was already eating. It would be impolite for the bride-to-be to start eating while Solheim was still talking. A servant brought a plate of pastries for the women and put it in front of Loki and Thor. Loki picked up the smallest piece of pastry very carefully. Meanwhile, Thor picked up all the other pastries and tucked into them, his veil concealing them from view as he chewed. The giantess, who had been looking forward to the plate of pastries, looked at Freyja with disappointment. But Freyja hadn't even really started eating yet. Thor ate an entire cow by himself. He also ate 7 salmon, leaving just the bones. Whenever a plate of pastries was put in front of him, he ate them all in no time, leaving the other women hungry. Sometimes Loki would kick him under the table, but Thor ignored it and carried on eating. Thorgrim gave Loki a friendly pat on the shoulder. Excuse me, but I believe Freyja has just finished her 3rd barrel of mead. Of course she has, Loki's alter ego said. That's incredible. I've never seen a woman eat like that before. And I've never seen a woman eat and drink so much, Loki said. This has a perfectly obvious explanation. He took a deep breath while watching Thor eat a whole salmon and then pull a fish skeleton out from under his veil. It all looked like magic. Loki was curious about what the real explanation was. This one's eaten 8 salmon in total, said Solheim. That's 8 days and nights. Loki suddenly interjected. She hasn't eaten for 8 days and nights. And she was really keen to come to the land of the giants to see her husband and have sex with him. Now she's here with you, she's finally started eating. The maiden turned to Thor. It's great to see you eating again, dear, she said. Thor shot a look at Loki from under his veil. I should give her a kiss, said Solheim. I wouldn't advise it. Not the right time, Loki said. But Solheim had already leaned over and made the sound of someone preparing to kiss. He reached out and grabbed Thor's veil. Loki's new girlfriend tried to stop him, but it was too late. The sound of the kiss stopped instantly, and Solheim bounced back into his seat, looking a little shaken. Solheim gave the maiden Loki had become a pat on the shoulder. Can I have a quick word with you? He said. Sure, they said, and got up to walk to the other end of the hall. Why are Freya's eyes so intense? Solheim inquired. They look like they're burning with flames. That's not how the eyes of a beautiful woman should look. Of course not. The young woman Loki had become replied smoothly. You'd never think her eyes would look like that. She hasn't slept for 8 days and nights, Solheim. She's consumed by the fire of Hana for you, so she can't sleep. She's completely infatuated and under your spell. She's absolutely crazy about you. And that's what you see in those eyes. There's a burning passion there. Oh, I see. He smiled and licked his lips with his tongue, which was bigger than any human pillow. Well then, they went back to the table. Thor's sister had already taken Loki's seat. She sat down next to Thor and tapped her fingernails against his hand. But you're sensible and understand the situation. You'll give me all your rings now, she said. All your beautiful golden rings. You need to understand that you'll be a complete stranger in this castle. You'll need to find someone to advise you, otherwise things could get unpleasant. You're marrying into a foreign land, so far away from home. Surely you could do with some help. You have so many rings. Why not give me some as a gift for the bride? They're so pretty, red and gold. Has the wedding not yet started? Loki inquired. Yes, Thor replied. He yelled, bring out the hammer and let's get this wedding started. I'll put Mjolnir on Freyja's knee. Let Val, the goddess who oversees the vows between men and women, bless and witness our love. The giants carried Thor's hammer. They brought it out from the great hall, from the depths. It shone faintly in the firelight. They gave it their all to get it on Thor's knee. Now, said Solheim, let me hear your sweet voice, my love, my little dove, my sweetheart. Just tell me how much you love me. Just tell me you'll be my bride. Tell me you'll be faithful to me, as women have sworn to men since time immemorial. And as men have sworn to women since time immemorial. What do you think? Thor grasped the hammer handle with his hand, which was adorned with gold rings. He gave it a little squeeze, feeling pretty confident. The hammer in his hand felt really familiar and comfortable. Who laughed? A quiet, deep laugh. What I was going to say, said Thor, in a voice that was both firm and friendly, is that you really shouldn't have stolen my hammer. He lifted the hammer and struck Solheim, killing him instantly. The monster fell to the straw-covered floor and didn't get back up. Thor took care of all the giants and ogres, the guests who had come to a wedding that was never going to happen, with one well-placed hammer blow. This even included Solheim's sister, who received an unexpected gift from the bride. Once the noise had died down, Thor called out, Loki. Loki got back to his own fall, crawled out from under the table, took a look around, and assessed the damage. Well, it seems like we've got that sorted, he said. Thor removed the woman's clothes and jewelry, and finally let out a sigh of relief. At that moment, he was standing in his underwear in the hall, covered in the bodies of giants. It's all done. This trip wasn't as bad as I thought. I've got my hammer back and I've eaten my fill. Let's head back to the office. Have you ever wondered where poetry comes from? Where do the songs and stories we sing and tell come from? Have you ever wondered why some people have such amazing dreams that are turned into poetry? And why will these poems be sung as long as the sun rises and wanes? Have you ever wondered why some people are so gifted that they can create songs, tones and stories that touch the hearts of others, while others have no talent for it? It's quite a story, and the one we're going to tell you this time is not a happy one. It's a story of murder, trickery, lies, stupidity, seduction, and courtship. Listen up. It all started at the dawn of time and the epic battle between the Asas and the Vannas. The Asas were the fighting gods who loved to conquer, while the Vannas were more gentle. They lived together as brothers and sisters, made the land fertile and the plants grow exuberantly, and were also very strong thanks to their divine power. The Asa and Nordic gods were constantly at odds with each other, and they were evenly matched. The more they fought, the more they realized they needed each other. What was the point of fighting if there were no rich fields and meadows to produce food, and sure there would be a feast to feast and drink to drink after every hearty battle? To make peace, the two sides sat down to talk. Once the negotiations were over, they agreed to a truce. The agreement was made by each of the Asa and Nordic gods spitting into a jar. They mixed all the spits together to seal the agreement. Then they held a party. They enjoyed the food and drink, chatting and laughing, toasting each other until the fire from the feast had died down and the sun was rising in the east. The Asa and one-hour gods got up and left, wrapping themselves in their fur coats and stepping out into the morning mist and fresh snow. Odin said, "It would be a shame to leave the saliva, which represents beasts there." The Frey and Freya siblings were also the leaders of the 1AR. According to the truce, they would live with the Osa gods in Asgard after the truce. The brother and sister gave a nod. "We can make a change," Frey said. "We should introduce a new god," Freya said, reaching into the jar. As her fingers stirred, the saliva began to take shape, and in a moment, a naked human figure stood before them. "You're Kvasir," said Odin. "Do you know who I am?" "You're Odin, the greatest of all," said Kvasir. "You're Grmn, Iron the Third. You have other names that I won't mention here, but I know them and I know the poems and songs that are associated with them." Kvasir, born of the union of the gods Osa and Vana, was the wisest of the gods. He was clever and had a kind heart. The gods were keen to ask him questions, and he always had wise answers. He was very observant and often gave accurate and insightful interpretations of the phenomena he saw. After a while, Kvasir told the gods, "I'm going on a little trip. I'm heading off to see the 9 worlds and Midgard. There are a few things I'd like to get off my chest that I haven't had the chance to discuss with anyone yet." "Are you planning to come back?" they asked. "I'll be back," said Kvasir, "but I'll need to come back to work on that tricky fishing net problem with you. I'll get to it one day." "What exactly are we talking about here?" Thor inquired. But Kvasir just smiled. He put on his cloak and crossed the rainbow bridge, leaving the gods with their questions. He left Asgard permanently. Kvasir traveled from city to city and from village to village. He met all kinds of people and was happy to answer their questions in a polite and sincere way. Everywhere Kvasir went, the place saw an uptick in prosperity and peacefulness after his visit. At that time, 2 dark elves lived in a castle by the sea. They were into sorcery and alchemy. Like other dwarves, they were very handy with their hands. They made all kinds of magical and exquisite things in the workshop and in the castle. But there were a few things they hadn't made yet, and they'd become really fixated on this unfinished project. The 2 brothers were called Efayala and Gona. They heard that Kvasir was visiting a nearby town, so they headed over to find him. The brothers Vaj and Gora found Kvasir in the main hall, where he was answering questions from the villagers. The villagers were pretty blown away by his answers. He showed them how to purify water and how to make cloth from metal. He told one woman who had stolen Hern halfway the thief had done it. When he'd finished, the villagers invited him to dinner, and the 2 dwarves waited for their chance. "We've got a question for you, one that no one's ever asked before. They can only be asked in private though. Will you come with us?" "I'll come with you," said Kvasir. They strolled over to the castle. As they walked, the seagulls screeched and grey clouds gathered in the sky, matching the colour of the sea. The dwarves took Kvasir to their workshop, which was deep within the castle. "What are those?" Kvasir inquired. "Those are 2 pots. They're called the pot of song and the pot of the bottom." "I see. And what are those?" "You're very wise. Surely you know this. This is a kettle. We call it the pot of Audriel, the pot of bliss. There are also some pots over there with the honey we've collected. There's no sealed liquid honey. We do have some honey pots," Efayala said. Gora looked at him with disdain. "If you're as clever as people say, you'll know what we're going to ask you without us having to tell you. You should also know what these things are for." Kvasir nodded in agreement. "If you're both clever and evil, you've probably decided to kill the invited visitor and let his blood flow into the jar of recitation and the jar of bodening. Then you'd use the aduaren to slowly boil the hot blood. Next, you'd mix the blood with unsealed honey and let it ferment until it became mead, the best mead you could imagine. Just one sip would make anyone drunk and give the drinker the gift of poetry and scholarship. We are clever, and some people might also find us evil, Gora admitted. He then proceeded to slit Kavyaisha's throat. They tied Kavyaisha up and hung him upside down over the pot until they drained his blood. They warmed the blood and honey in the pot of Audriel and added something else. They added berries and stirred the liquid with a stick. After a while, it started to bubble, and after a while longer, it stopped. They each took a sip and then looked at each other and laughed. The two brothers suddenly found themselves with a talent for rhythm and poetry, which was a new experience for them. The next morning, a group of gods came looking for Kavyaisha. Kavyaisha was seen with you at the end, they said. Yes, the dwarves replied. He came back with us. But then he realized that we were just foolish dwarves lacking in wisdom, and he choked on his own knowledge. We never got the chance to ask him any questions. You mean he's dead? Yes, said Fjala and Gora. They gave Kavyaisha's body back to the gods so they could take it back to Asgard and give him a funeral resurrection ceremony, because gods are not like other living things. Death is not always final for them, and resurrection is not uncommon. From then on, the dwarves had control of the mead of wisdom and poetry. Anyone who wanted a taste of it had to ask them nicely. But Gora and Fjala only gave it to the guys they liked, and they didn't like any guys except themselves, that sometimes they had to entertain, like the giant Gilling and his wife. The dwarves invited the couple to visit the castle, and one winter's day they did. Let's go rowing, the dwarves suggested to Gilling. The giant was so heavy that the boat took on a lot of water. Normally, the dwarves could row safely across the sea, which was full of rocks because they were so light. But this time the boat was too heavy with Gilling in it. The boat hit a rock and capsized. Swim back to the boat, the dwarf brothers told Gilling. Jaiwalarin was unable to swim and said so before he went under. A wave came in, and the salty sea water filled his mouth. His head hit the reef, and he disappeared from view in a moment. Fjala and Gora turned the boat over and rowed back home. Jaiwalarin's wife was waiting for them. Where's my husband? She asked. Him? Said Gora. Oh, he's passed away. Fjala added that he drowned. When she heard the bad news, the giantess started to cry. She wept as if every sound was coming from her broken heart. She called out her husband's name and said she'd love him forever. She let out a loud cry and then began to sob silently. Cut it out, said Gora. Your crying and screaming is really hurting my ears. It's too noisy in here. It must be because you're a giant. When she heard this, the giant's wife just cried even harder. I've got an idea, said Fjala. How about I show you where your husband died? She sniffed, nodded, and wept bitterly, remembering her husband, who would never return. Just stand there, we'll show you, said Fjala. She showed her exactly where she should stand. She should walk past the gate and stand at the foot of the castle wall. Then he gave a nod to his brother Gola. Gola walked up to the wall. Gilling's wife stepped out of the door without a word. And that was when Gola let go of the rope holding the boulder. The stone fell and hit her head, killing her instantly and cracking her skull open. Good work, said Fjala. That awful noise was really starting to grate on me. They culled the dead giantess's body from the edge of the rock and into the sea. The grey waves reached out and took her body away. Gilling and his wife were finally reunited after death. The dwarf brothers just shrugged and carried on living in the castle by the sea, where they considered themselves the wisest men in the world. Every night they enjoyed a glass of poetry and recited some beautiful poems to each other. They wrote some cutty, amazing poems about the death of Jailin and his wife, who were together at the time. Every night, they stood on the castle battlements and recited these poems. They only fell asleep after they'd run out of steam from all their choretic operators. The next morning, they woke up right where they'd fallen asleep the night before. It was just like any other day, except that when they woke up, they didn't open their eyes, and see their castle as usual. When they woke up, they were in their cabin and saw an unknown giant rowing in the waves. The sky was grey, the storm was brewing, and the sea was pretty rough. The wind was strong and the waves were rough, and the salty sea water splashed against the dwarves' ship, soaking them from head to toe. "Who are you?" the dwarves inquired. "I'm Sir Tun," the giant said. "I've heard you boasting to the wind and the waves, and to the whole world, about killing my parrot." "Ah," said Gora, "is that why you've tied us up?" "That's right," said Sir Tun. "Maybe you actually want to take us somewhere nice," said Fjala hopefully. "When we get there, you'll untie us and we'll enjoy feasts and wine and laugh with you and become best friends." "I hadn't considered that," Sue then said. "It was low tide, so the reefs in the sea were exposed. It was here, not long ago, at high tide, that the reefs had capsized the dwarves' boat, causing Joella to drown." Sue then picked up the two dwarves one at a time and tied them to the reef. "When the tide goes up, these rocks will be underwater, that we can't move our hands. We can't swim. If you leave us here, we'll definitely drown." "That's precisely what I plan to do," Sue then said. He smiled for the first time. "I'll just sit here in the boat and watch you drown. Once you're dead, I'll go back to Jotunheim and tell my brother Balder and my daughter GL how you died. Our family will be very happy because we'll have got our own back for what happened." The sea started to rise. The water reached the dwarves' waists and quickly covered their navels. Before long, the dwarves' beards were floating in the sea foam, and they looked terrified and panicked. "Please, have mercy on us," they pleaded, "like you showed mercy to my parents. We'll make it up to you. We'll make it up to you for the loss of your parents. We'll pay you. I can't accept your offer because the loss of my parents is something that compensated for. I'm a wealthy individual with considerable influence. I've got a huge castle in the mountains with a whole team of servants. I have enough wealth to enjoy for the rest of my life. I've got gold and precious stones, plus enough materials for 1,000 swords. I'm a pretty powerful magician. What can you offer me in return? I have everything I could possibly want. What can you offer me that I don't already have?" Sutun inquired. The dwarves didn't say anything. The waves were crashing and the sea level was still rising. "We have mead, the honeyed wine of poetry," Gora managed to say, struggling to speak as water choked his mouth. "It's mead made from the blood of Kvasia, the wisest of gods." Fjala called out, "We've got 2 jars and a jug, all filled with mead. This mead is ours alone. There's nothing else like it in the world." Sue then scratches his head thoughtfully. "I need to think this through. I need to take a moment to meditate. I need to take a moment to reflect. Don't overthink this. If you think any more, we'll drown," Fjala yells, fighting against the waves. The tide is still on the rise. The waves are pounding against the dwarves' heads as they struggle to breathe, their eyes wide with fear. Then Sue, the giant, reaches down and lifts Fjala up, followed by Gora. "I think we can agree that the mead of poetry is an acceptable form of compensation. It would be reasonable to suggest that you add something else. I'm sure you dwarves have something valuable to offer. Then I'll let you off." He threw the 2 dwarves, still tied up with their hands behind their backs and soaking wet, into the cabin. They wriggled about like 2 lobsters with beards. The giant rowed back to shore. Sutun took a sip of the mead the dwarves had made from the blood of Kvasia. He also took something else from them. The dwarves were generally happy when he left, relieved to have survived and to have escaped this ordeal. Fjala and Gora told people who were passing by the castle what Sutun had done. They told the people in the market with whom they had done business. They also let the local crows know. At this time, Odin was sitting on his high throne in Asgard. The ravens Fokyn like me perched on his shoulders. gave him a quick update on what they'd seen and heard during their travels through the Nine Well. Odin's eye lit up when he heard about Suttun's. People who heard the story called the poems Mead the dwarf ship because it had carried Fgiala and Gora safely back from the sea reef. They also called it Suttun's Mead, Odariel, Bodin, or the Solm's Mead. Odin listened to the raven's low voice. He got his cloak and hat. He called the gods together and asked them to get 3 huge casks ready. Once they were ready, he said, they were to be taken to the gates of Osgard. He told the gods that he was going to be away for a while, exploring the world. This time, the journey is going to be a long one. I'll take 2 things, said Odin. I need the best whetstone we have here for sharpening my sword. I also need the drill called Lotti. Lotti was the sharpest drill the gods had, and it meant drill. It could drill very deep through the hardest stone. Odin threw the whetstone into the air, caught it, and put it in his bag next to the drill. Then he set off on his way. I'm curious to know where he's going, said Thor. If Kavir were here, he'd know, said Frigg. He knows everything. Kavir is dead, said Loki. I don't care where the Allfather goes or why. I'll help build the grate that the Allfather wants, said Thor. Suttunn gave the precious mead to his daughter, Gerod, to keep safe. She kept it safe in a mountain called Fjonitborg, right in the middle of the land of giants. Odin didn't go to the mountain. He went straight to the pasture belonging to Suttunn's brother, Bjorgasti. It was springtime, and the fields were covered in straw, which was about to be cut for fodder. Bjorg had 9 slaves, all of whom were giants like him. They were busy cutting the grass with scythes that were as big as small trees. Odin observed. When it was lunchtime, Odin went over to the workers and said, I see you've been working for a while. Can I ask why your boss lets you cut the grass with such dull scythes? Our scythes are not dull, said one worker. Why do you say that? The other worker inquired. Our scythes are the sharpest. I'll show you what a really sharp knife looks like, said Odin. Give this a try. He took the whetstone out of his pocket and ran it over the first blade, then the other until each scythe was gleaming in the sunlight. The giants stood around him, looking a little embarrassed as he sharpened the blades. Right, let's try the blades again. The giant slaves brandished their scythes and cheered as they mowed the meadow grass. The blades were so sharp that they cut the grass with ease. The blades effortlessly cut through the thickest grass without meeting any resistance. This is incredible, they told Odin. Can we buy your sharpening stone? Buy? The father of the gods inquired. Of course not, but maybe we can do something more interesting and fair. Come over here, everyone. To a circle and grip your scythe firmly. Let's stand closer together. We can't stand any closer, said one of the giant slaves. The scythes are pretty sharp. You're very clever, said Odin as he raised the whetstone. I'll make a deal with you. The first person to grab it gets it. He then threw the whetstone into the air. As it fell, the 9 giants jumped up one after the other. Each one caught the stone with the hand that wasn't holding a scythe. And the hand holding the scythe forgot all about it, even though the scythes they were holding had just been sharpened by the father of the gods, and were already incredibly sharp. They leapt high into the air and met in midair. The sun glinted off the scythes, making them sparkle. Red liquid spattered in the sunlight, and the slaves fell one after the other, dropping down next to the straw they had just cut. Odin walked over the bodies of the giants, picked up the sharpening stones belonging to the gods, and put them back in his pocket. Each of the 9 slaves died from a throat cut made by the blades of their companion. Odin made his way to the hall of Bjorg, who was also Suttun's brother. Odin asked if he could stay the night. My name is Bolverk, Odin said. Bolverk, Bjorg repeated. That is a shameful name. It means one who does bad things. That's true of my rivals, but my colleagues are supportive of my work. I can get the job done by working 9 times as hard as anyone else. but I can work without stopping or complaining. You can stay the night, Beorge said, with a little sigh. Unfortunately, it's not the best time for you to come by. This is a bit of a rough day. Yesterday, I was a wealthy landowner with thousands of acres of fertile land and 9 strong slaves who worked the harvest and made repairs. But tonight, I still have my fields and livestock, but my staff are all dead. They suddenly turned on each other, and I have no idea why they did it. This is a tough one, said Odin, who went by Paul Fouquet. Can you find other workers? Not this year, Beorge said with a little sigh. It's already spring. All the best workers have gone to help my brother Saturn. It's not often that I get any passers-by here. You're the first person to ask for shelter here in years. Luckily, you came across me. I can get the work done of 9 people. You're not a giant, you're just a small shrimp, said Beorge. How could you possibly do the work of my 9 servants? If I don't finish the work of your 9 servants, you don't have to pay me, said Paul Fouquet. But if I do, if you do what? We've all heard stories about your brother Sut-10's magical mead. I've heard that those who drink it are gifted with the gift of poetry. That's right. When we were kids, Sut-10 was never one for poetry. I was the poet in the family. But ever since he got back with the dwarf's mead, he's been writing poetry and dreaming up new ideas. If I work for you, doing all the hard work like sowing, repairing, harvesting and taking over the tasks your dead servants used to do, I'd like to be rewarded with a taste of your brother Sut-10's mead. But Beauj, I frowned. I can't give it to you. It's not mine. It's Sut-10's. That's a shame, said Paul Fouquet. I wish you a good harvest this year. Wait a minute. You didn't know the mead isn't mine. If you stick to your promise, I'll take you to my brother Saturn. I'll do my best to help you taste his mead. Deal, said Paul Fouquet. Paul Fouquet was the hardest worker I've ever seen. He worked as hard as 9 people, and he worked more efficiently than 20. He took care of the animals. He also harvested the crop. He plowed the land, and it paid him back 1,000 lad. Paul Fouquet. Beauj, I said as the first winter mist swept in from the mountains. You've got the wrong name. You don't do anything wrong, only right. Have I done the work of 9 men? You have done it, and then some. Then you'll help me taste the mead of full thumb. I'll help. They got up bright and early the next morning and walked until, in the evening, they left Beorge's territory and reached Thortham's land at the foot of the mountain. By the time night fell, they'd reached Thortham's hall. Hello, Sut-10. Beorgesti, I said. This is Paul Fouquet, who works for me in the summer and is also a good friend of mine. Then he filled Sut-10 in on the agreement between him and Paul Fouquet. So as I'm sure you'll agree, I'd be grateful if you'd let him sample the muse's nectar. Sut-10's eyes were as cold as mica. No, he said firmly. No? Beorgesti, I inquired. No way. I'm not giving up that mead, not even a drop. Not a single drop. I've got its safely stashed away in the pots of Bodin and Solm, and in the jug of Odili. These vessels are located in the depths of the mountain Fonaiberg, and only I have the authority to open them. My daughter Gerald is in charge of the mead. I'm afraid your servant cannot taste it. You can't either, but said Beorge, that was to make up for the lives of our parents. Do I have some, please? I have to maintain my dignity and show Paul Fouquet that I am a man of my word. No, said Sut-10. You can't. They left the hall. Beauj was feeling pretty down, with his shoulders slumped but his mouth hanging open. Every few steps, Beauj apologized to Paul Fouquet. I didn't realize my brother was so unreasonable, he said. He is very unreasonable indeed, said Paul Fouquet, who had turned into Odin. Perhaps I could teach him a lesson so that he doesn't behave so impolitely in the future. Then he'd be more likely to listen to his brother in future. That's a good idea, said Beauj, straightening up a little. His lips were no longer hanging down, but straight and into a line, and he even looked like he was smiling. "What should we do?" "First," said Paul Fouquet, "we climb Mount Finnet Bird, which is closed at the moment." Together, they climbed the Bird, with Paul Fouquet in front and the giant behind. Even though he was tiny compared to the giant, he never fell behind. They followed the goat track, climbing over boulders, until they reached the high mountain. The first snow of the winter had fallen on the snow that had not melted all year. They could hear the wind howling in the mountains. They could hear birds singing in the distance at their feet. And then there was another sound. It sounded like a human voice, as if it came from the boulders in the mountain, but it also seemed distant, as if it came from the mountain itself. "What's that sound?" Paul Fouquet inquired. Bauji frowned. "It sounds like my niece, Glore, singing." "Then let's stop here." Paul Fouquet took out a ratchet drill from his leather bag. "Come on," he said. "You're a giant of great size and strength. Use this drill to bore a hole in the mountain." Bauji took the drill. He put it up against the side of the mountain and started drilling. The drill bit went into the rock, but it was going into a soft cork. Bauji kept on drilling. "All done," Bauji said. He took the drill out, went over to the hole, and gave it a puff. Stone chips and dust flew up at him. "I figured out two things," Fork said. "What's up?" Bauji inquired. "We haven't drilled through the mountain yet," Fouquet said. "You just need to keep drilling. That's only one thing," Bauji said. But Fouquet didn't go on. He was standing on top of the high mountain, the cold wind blowing in his face. Bauji pulled the drill back up and put it back into the hole and started drilling again. As it got dark, Bauji pulled the drill out again. "It's gone into the mountain," he said. Fouquet didn't say anything, but he blew another blast into the hole. This time, he saw stone chips and dust flying in. Just then, he had the feeling that something was coming up behind him. Paul Fouquet transformed into a snake in an instant. As it happened, the sharp drill landed right where his head had been. "The second thing I understood when you lied to me was that you would betray me," said the snake to Bauji, who stood by surprised. The giant grabbed the drill as if it were a weapon, and with a flick of his tail, the snake disappeared into the cave that Bauji had dug. Bauji kept hitting the drill, but the snake had already swum away. He threw the drill angrily, and it clattered against the rocks. Bauji thought about telling Sutien, but then he'd have to tell his brother that he'd helped a mysterious and powerful magician up to the Vinetberg and helped him drill into the mountain. He thought about how Sutien would react to the news. Bauji then hung his head and pouted as he headed back down the mountain to his home. It was none of his business what happened to his brother or to his precious mead. Bolverk slithered into the cave until he reached the end, where he found himself in a cavern. The cave was lit by the cold glow of fluorescent ore, and changed back into human form again. And this time he wasn't just human, he was huge and pretty good looking too. Then he followed the sound of singing. Gerard, the daughter of Suttun, was standing by the locked door of the cave. Behind it, the singing jar, the jar of Bowden, and the potted gorilla were hidden. She stood there, holding a sharp sword, and sang softly. "Greetings, brave maiden," said Odin. Gerda looked at him. "I don't know who you are," she said. "Tell me your name and why I should let you live." "My name's Gerda, and I'm the guardian of this place." "I'm Belevacare," Odin said. "I deserve to die for coming here. Let me just take a moment to look at you. My father, Sathorn, had me here to look after and protect the mead of poetry," said Jardé. Paul Fouquet gave a shrug. "Why should I care about the mead of poetry? I came here because I'd heard a lot about Giardi, Sathorn's daughter, and all the beauty, courage, and virtue she had. I told myself, if I could meet her, if she is really as beautiful as they say, then it would be worth dying. That's what I thought." Gerard looked at the impressive figure in front of her. So, before the dying, do you think it was worth it? It was definitely worth it, he told her. You're even more beautiful in person than I'd ever imagined. Your beauty is beyond compare. No poem could ever do it justice. You're more beautiful than the peaks of the mountains, more beautiful than the glaciers, and more beautiful than the new snow that falls at dusk. Gerard looked down, her cheeks flushing a little. Could I sit next to you? Pourvu Arke asked. Gerald just nodded. They sat together and shared the food and wine she'd brought from the mountain. Once they'd finished eating, they kissed each other in the darkness. Afterwards, Paul Furquet said sadly, I wish I could taste a sip of the mead in the psalm jar. Then I could write a great poem about your eyes, one that would last forever and be passed on by all who appreciate beauty in the future. Just one sip, she inquired. Just a tiny sip, no one would notice, he said. But I'm in no hurry. You're the most important thing to me. Let me show you just how important you are to me. He gave her a hug. They had sex in the dark. After the storm, they held each other, their skin touching and their ears brushing against each other. Piova, you see, let out a little sigh at that moment. What's the problem? Gerald inquired. Unfortunately, I'm not very talented, but I'd love to be able to sing your praises. They're so soft, more seductive than any other woman's lip. I think if this were to become a poem, it would be a really moving one. That's a shame, said Glor. My lips are very attractive. I often think it's my best feat. Maybe, but with so many perfect features, it's tough to choose the most beautiful one. If I could just taste a little of the mead in the jar called Bowden, the rhythm of the poem would flow into my soul, and I could write the most resplendent and magnificent verse for your lip. The smallest sip, she agreed. If my father thinks I've been giving me to every handsome young man who passes through the mountain castle, he'll be furious. They strolled through the cave hand in hand, sharing kisses every so often. Gerald showed Paul Furquet the doors and windows in the mountain, through which Sut Tumpy brought her food. Paul Furquet didn't seem to be listening to what she was saying. He said he wasn't interested in anything that didn't involve Gerald, and that he only cared about her eyes, lips, fingers and hair. Gerald laughed and said that none of his words could be trusted. He said that he must have lost interest and no longer wanted to make love to her. He kissed her and they had sex again. When they were done, Piova cried in the dark. What's up, my love? Kill me, Piova said. Now I can't even begin to describe how beautiful you are. Your hair, your skin, your voice, your fingertips, they're all so gorgeous. I'm struggling to find the right words to describe Gerard's beauty. I suppose it's not straightforward to write a poem like that, but it's not impossible either, I think. Maybe. What? Maybe a little sip of mead from the pot of rimboard could give me the gift of words and allow me to write a poem that celebrates your beauty and will be passed on from mouth to mouth for eternity, he suggested, and the crying gradually subsided. Yes, that could be a solution, but you can only take the tiniest sip. Give me the jug, and I'll show you just how small a sip I'll take. Gerard opened the door, and in a moment she and Paul Furquet were standing in front of the jug and the two pots. The aroma of the poetry mead filled the room. It'll only be a tiny sip, she said. Just enough to write those 3 immortal poems in my praise. Of course, my dear, Beleva said with a smile in the darkness. If only she could have seen his face at that moment, she would have realized something was up. He drained the last drop of the potion from the bottle of order with his first sip. By the time he took his second sip, he'd emptied the jar of Bowden. And with the third one, he drained the tank of song. Gudrun was no fool. She realized straight away that she'd been tricked. She came at him. The giantess was quick and strong, but Odin didn't fight back. He just got out of there. He pulled the door open and locked her inside with a bang. In the blink of an eye, he had transformed into a giant eagle. Odin flapped his wings and let out a cry, and the mountain gates opened, allowing him to soar into the sky. Gudrun let out a scream that echoed across the door. Sutunen woke up and went outside. He saw a giant eagle in the sky and immediately understood what had happened. Sutunen also transformed into an eagle. The two eagles flew so high that from the ground, they looked like just two tiny dots in the sky. They flew so fast that the sound of their wings beating was like a hurricane roaring. Meanwhile, back in Asgard, Thor said, "Now." He rolled the three huge barrels under the city wall. The gods of Asgard watched as the two hawks came screaming through the air, very close together. Sif flew at a fast pace, keeping close behind Odin. By the time they reached Asgard, Sif's hawk was practically touching Odin's tail feathers. When they got to the Great Hall, Odin started to spit out wine. A mead came gushing out of his hawk's beak like a fountain and went into the barrels that had been prepared in advance. Barrel after barrel, just like a father feeding his hungry baby birds. So it seems that since then, anyone who's good with words and can write poems has tasted the poetry of it. When we hear a beautiful and moving poem, we know that the author has been gifted by Odin. This is the story of how the mead of poetry was shared with the world. It's a story of dishonesty, deception, murder and treachery. But that's not the whole story. There's something else I haven't told you. That you're easily offended, you might want to cover your ears or stop reading now. I'm afraid I have to tell you that this last part is a bit of a shame. When the Allfather turned up in Asgard in the form of an eagle and almost flew into the barrel, and when Sir Tun gave chase, Odin spat some mead out of his backside. A large quantity of mead was released directly into Sir Tun's eyes, temporarily blinding the giant and preventing him from catching up with Odin. Nobody, then or now, would want to drink mead from Odin's ass. That when you hear poets who aren't very good spout poems that are devoid of poetry, use stupid metaphors and are badly rhymed, you can understand what kind of mead they drink. Si, that and his sister Ross Kva, their father Ire and their mother live on a farm in the mountains and feel. Outside the farm, there are monsters, giants and wool. Ed has been in trouble several times, but he's always managed to get away. He's got great speed and can outrun anything. Esif and Ross Kva are used to living on the edge of the mountains, so they're used to miracles and all kinds of strange things. Something pretty strange happened. One day, two gods from Asgard came to visit their farm. Loki and Thor arrived in a chariot made of brass, pulled by Thor's two enormous goats, Gnir and Gadinar. They asked if they could stay the night and have something to eat. They both looked tall and strong. "I'm really sorry, but we don't have any food for you," said Ross Kva. "We've got some vegetables, but this winter has been so harsh that we've even lost the hens." Thor grunted, then took out his dagger and killed his two goats. He then proceeded to skin them. He put the goats in the big cauldron over the fire while Dees and his mother got to work chopping up the winter vegetables and throwing them into the pot. Loki called Sif over. The boy was a little shy, as he was afraid of Loki. He was afraid of his green eyes, his scarred lips, and the way he smiled. Loki said, "You know, the marrow of those two goats is the best delicacy a young man can eat, the rarest thing in the world. Unfortunately, Thor only keeps the marrow for himself. If you want to be as strong and valiant as Thor, you should eat the goat marrow." Once the food was ready, Thor picked up one whole goat for himself and shared the remaining one with the other 5. He laid the goat's skin on the ground and threw the bones onto it while he ate. "Just put the bones you eat on a separate goat's tin and make sure you don't break them or chew them up," he told the others. "Just a heads up, only eat the meat. You think you eat quickly, don't you? You should see how Loki swallows his food. 1 minute, the meal is in front of him, and the next, he's just wiping his mouth on the back of his hand over an empty plate." The others ate more slowly, but Sif couldn't forget what Loki had told him. So when Thor left the table to go to the bathroom, Sif took hold of his dagger and cut into the bone of a leg of mutton and ate the marrow. He put the broken leg back on the goat skin and covered it with the other, undamaged bones so that no one would find out. That night, they all slept in the hall. The next morning, Thor wrapped the goat bone in the goat skin. He got the hammer James near and held it up high. He called out, "Biter, become one." In an instant, a flash of lightning lit up the sky. Thor called out again, "Grinder, become one." The grinder also sprang to life. However, it hobbled over to the goat, bleating as if it was in pain, in a rather unusual posture. "The gnawing goat has injured the hind legs of the grinding one," said Thor. "Could you get me some wooden cloth?" He made a splint for the goat's leg and wrapped it in cloth. Once he'd done that, he looked at the family. If had never seen anything like it. Thor's eyes were red and burning. He grabbed the handle of his hammer. "One of you has broken that leg bone," he told them in a voice that was firm but not unkind. "I gave you a feast to enjoy, and I asked only one thing, and you let me down." "I did it," said Esius. "I broke the bone." Loki tried to look serious, but he couldn't help smiling a little. It wasn't the kind of smile that made people feel at ease. Thor picked up his hammer. "I should smash this whole farm to pieces," he muttered. And Aya's fear made him tremble, and Aya's wife began to cry. Then Thor said, "Can you think of any reason why I shouldn't just destroy this place?" Egil didn't say anything. His son, Sigurd, stood up. He said, "My father has nothing to do with this. He has no idea what I've done. I accept your decision to punish me, but I ask that you let him go. Just look at me for a second. I'm very fast on my feet. I'm also very clever. Let my parents go and I'll be your squire." His sister Ske also stood up. "He can't go alone," she said. "If you're taking him, I'd like to come to him." Thor took a moment to think it over, then replied, "Very well. Come now on, Eve. You'll be staying here to look after the tooth biter and the tooth grinder. You can wait until the tooth grinder's leg has healed. I'll come back for you and the goat on my way back." He turned to Sif and said, "You come with me and follow Loki and me. We're heading to Utgard, the outer world." The area beyond the farm was pretty barren. Thor, Loki and If set off westwards, heading towards Jotunheim, the land of giants and the sea. As they headed west, the temperature dropped. The icy wind swept through, taking the warmth out of the air. As the sun was setting, there was only a little daylight left, so faint that they could only see things vaguely. They looked for somewhere to spend the night. Thor and just couldn't find anything. Loki went off for a while, and when he came back, he looked a bit puzzled. "There's a strange shaped house over there." "How strange is that?" Thor inquired. "There's just one big room. There are no windows, but there is a big porch with no door. It's like a big cage." The cold wind made their fingers go numb and their cheeks ached. Thor said, "We should take a look." The hallway seemed to go on forever. "There might be wild animals or monsters in there," Thor said. "Let's set up camp near the entrance." And that's what they did. The place was just as Loki had described it, a huge house with one big room and another room all the way to the end. They made a fire near the entrance and got some sleep for an hour. Then they were woken by a noise. "What's that noise?" Sif inquired. "Could it be an earthquake?" Thor replied. The ground was shaking. There was a loud noise that seemed to be coming from somewhere nearby. It could be a volcano, or maybe a boulder has collapsed, or even 100 angry bears. "I don't think so," Loki replied. "Let's head to the room next door and make sure we're safe." Loki and Sif slept in the side room while the tremor continued to rumble until dawn. Thor was on guard all night, holding his hammer. The long night made him more and more frustrated, and he was starting to feel the urge to vent his anger by smashing whatever was causing the earth to tremble. As the sky started to brighten, Thor ventured into the forest to investigate the source of the sound, this time without disturbing his traveling companions. As he walked further, he realized that the sound wasn't just one sound, but a combination of several sounds in a specific order. First, there was a rumbling growl, then a low hum, then a whistling sound that was sharp and gave Thor a headache. Thor reached the top of the hill and looked down. In the valley below, he saw the biggest man he had ever come across. His hair and beard were jet black, and his skin was as white as snow. The giant had his eyes closed and was snoring steadily, which was the source of the sound Thor had heard before. Every time the giant snored, there was a slight tremor in the ground. That was what was causing the tremors they had felt before. The giant was so huge that Thor felt like a tiny insect in comparison. Thor touched his belt of divine power, Engelmir, and pulled it taut, making him twice as strong. With this strength, he could take on even the strongest of the giants. While Thor was looking at the giant opened his eyes. They were sharp and ice blue. The uninvited guest didn't seem to cause him any concern. "Hello," said Thor. "Good morning." The black-haired giant replied, his voice as loud as a thunderclap. "People call me Eskrymia. It's a nickname that means bigger guy. But they're joking, my colleagues, calling me big guy when I'm actually quite small compared to you. Right, let me just check where my gloves are. I have a pair, but I lost one last night." He held up his hands. One was wearing a huge leather glove, while the other was bare. "Ah, here it is." He reached over to the other side of the mountain that Thor had just climbed and picked up the other glove, presumably. "A bit strange, isn't it? There's something in it," he said, and then shook the glove. Almost at the same time as SCF and Loki fell out of it and onto the snow as they shook. Thor knew those mittens were from the same house they'd stayed in the night before. Eskrymia put the glove on his left hand and took a look at it, smiling. "We can travel together if you're interested." Thor looked at Loki, who looked back at him, and then they both looked at the young SIF together. The young man gave a shrug. "I can keep up," he said, sounding confident about his speed. "That's fine," Thor said. They had breakfast with the giant, who ate a whole cow goat from his ration sack, while the other three ate less. Once they'd finished eating, Eskrymia said, "Here's what we'll do. I can carry your rations for you, so let me put them in my sack. That way you'll have less to carry, and we can eat together again tonight where we camp." He put their food in his sack, tied the string around it, and sat. Thor and Loki kept up with the giant, moving at a pace that was both swift and tireless. F ran as fast as she could, probably faster than anyone else. But it was getting harder and harder to keep up with her as the hours passed. Sometimes the giant seemed like a mountain in the distance, its head hidden in the cloud. As the sun was setting, they caught up with Sigurd. He found a spot to set up camp under a big old oak tree, was relaxing next to it, resting his head on a boulder. "I'm not hungry, so I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me alone. I'm going to head to bed early. Just so you know, I've put your dry provisions in my bag, which is hanging from the tree. Good night." He started to snore. SF made her way over to the giant's bag of provisions, accompanied by the familiar low rumble and whine that vibrated the trees. He called out to Thor and Loki, "I can't get the string undone. It's tied so tightly, it's like it's made of iron." "I can break iron rods," said Thor, jumping onto the top of the bag and starting to pull hard on the tied string. "What do you think?" Loki inquired. Thor grumbled to himself, gave the rope a few more tugs, and then grumbled again. At last, he gave a shrug. "It looks like we're not going to get any dinner tonight, unless the giant empties his bag for us," he said. He looked at the giant. He took another look at the hammer and Mirror in his hand. Then he got out of the bag and climbed onto Eskrymia's head while he was sleeping. Sigurd opened one eye groggily. "It's as if a leaf had just fallen on my head and woken me up," he said, yawning. "Has everyone finished eating? Are you ready for bed? If you want to sleep, go ahead. It's been a long day." With that, he rolled over, closed his eyes, and started snoring again. Despite the loud snoring, Loki and SIF fell asleep, but Thor couldn't. He was annoyed, hungry, and didn't trust the giant in the wild eastern wilderness. By midnight, he was still feeling pretty hungry and had enough of the snoring. Once again, he climbed onto the giant's head and stood between its eyebrows. Thor took a moment to spit into his hand. He adjusted his power belt and raised Mjail near above his head. He gathered all his strength and swung the hammer with a mighty blow. He was pretty sure it had hit Skimir in the forehead. It was still too dark to see what color the giant's eyes were, but they opened. "Wow," said the large man. "Thor, is that you there?" It sounded like an acorn had fallen from a tree and hit me on the head. "What time is it?" "It's midnight," said Thor. "Well then, I'll catch up with you in the morning." The giant snored again, shaking the ground and causing the branches above his head to tremble. By the time the sun was up, Thor was feeling hungrier and angrier than ever. After a sleepless night, he decided to put an end to the snoring once and for all with a killing blow. This time, he aimed for the giant's temple and gave it a good, strong hit. The blow was totally unexpected. Thor could hear the echo in the mountains. "You know," said Skrimir, "it sounded like a bird's nest had just landed on my head. I'm not sure." He yawned, stretched, and then stood up. "That's enough sleep for me. Right, it's time to go. Have you heard of Utgard, the outer world? They'll take care of you there. They'll feed you well, serve you beer and horn goblets. And then you'll take part in wrestling, running and strength testing. Out there, they enjoy having fun. Outlanders do east. Just keep walking in that direction, and you'll see it when the sky is lit up by lightning. I'm actually heading north." He gave them a smile, showing a missing front tooth. His smile looked a bit silly, like he was trying to hide something, but his eyes were blue and his gaze was sharp. Then he leaned in and put a hand over his mouth, as if he didn't want anyone to overhear what he was about to say. But his whisper was still pretty loud, so it didn't have much effect. "I couldn't help but overhear you talking about how big I am. I'm guessing you were complimenting me. But if you go north one day, you'll meet some real giants. They're huge. Then you'll see that I'm just a little guy." Skrimir laughed again, then stamped on the ground and headed north. The earth made a quiet sound as he walked on it. They headed east, passing Jotunheim, and continued in the direction of the sunrise for a while. At first, they thought they were heading for a regular-sized castle not far away. They picked up the pace, but the castle still didn't seem any bigger or any closer. As time went on, they began to grasp just how enormous and how distant the castle really was. "Is that the Outlands?" Sif inquired. Loki looked almost serious as he replied, "Yes, that's where my family's from. Have you been here before?" "No, not yet." They made their way up the steps of the castle, but didn't see a soul. They could hear what sounded like a party going on inside. The walls were taller than many churches, and there was a metal railing around them. A railing like that would keep any uninvited guests out, even giants. Thor called out, but there was no reply. "Should we go in?" he asked Loki and Sif. The group crouched and crawled under the door jamb. They made their way across the courtyard and into the great hall. The benches were as high as the treetops, and the giants were sitting on them. Thor made his way into the room, with Sif a little more cautious but following closely behind him. Loki brought up the rear. At the far end of the hall, the king of the giants was sitting on the highest throne. The three of them walked across the hall and bowed deeply to the king of the giants. The king had a wise, narrow face and fiery red hair. His eyes were a cold blue. He looked at the travelers in front of him and raised an eyebrow. Well, he said, "it looks like the little doll like ones had invaded. My mistake. You must be Thor, son of the Gods. That makes you Loki, son of Laufey. I knew your mother. Hello, little relative. I'm Loki of Utgard, also known as Loki of the Outlands. And who are you?" "I'm Hyef," said Hyef. "I'm Thor's squire." "Welcome to Utgard," said Loki of the Outlands. "This is where heroes come together, the best place in the world. Here, whether it's craftsmanship or cunning, if you have a skill that is better than all the others, then you are welcome. Does anyone here have any special abilities? And what about you, little relative? Do you have any unique skills?" Loki said. I can eat faster than anyone. That's very interesting. This is my assistant. As it happens, his name is Loki. Would you like to take him on in an eating competition? Loki gave a shrug that seemed to suggest he didn't care either way. Loki of Outland clapped his hands. When he clapped his hands again, Loki started to eat. He lowered his mouth from the far end of the trough, made quickly, all the way to the center. He ate with gusto, completely absorbed in the task at hand. It was as if his sole objective in life was to eat quickly, and to eat a lot, as quickly and as much as possible. His hands and mouth moved so fast that all you could see was the shadows of the movements. Loki and Loki met in the middle of the table. Loki from the outer realms looked down from his throne. Well, he said, you both ate just as fast, both good. But Loki ate eating the bones. And look, he ate the wooden broth as well. Loki ate all the meat, but he didn't touch the bones or the wooden broth. So this time it's Loki who comes out on top. Loki of Outland looked at Essimif. You young man, he said, what can you do in this situation? If gave a shrug. Of all the people he knew, he was the fastest. He could outrun even the fastest rabbits and birds in flight. I can run, he said. Very well, said Loki of Outland, then run. They went outside and found a great spot for a race on the flat ground with a running track. A few giants were standing by the track, rubbing their hands together and blowing on them to warm them up. You're still young, Loki of the Outlands said. I won't let you race against an adult either. Where's our little Huey? A giant child stepped out. He was so slight that it seemed as if he hadn't been there before, and he was no bigger than Loki or Thor. The child looked at Loki of Outland and smiled, but didn't say anything. A wasn't sure if the boy had been there before he was called, but there he was. Huji and A stood side by side on the starting line, ready for the signal. Let's go. Loki from the Outland gave a shout that was like thunder, and the two boys set off. If ran faster than he had ever run before, but he saw Huji pass him. Huji only made it to the halfway point before reaching the finish line. Loki of the Outlands, that Huji had won. Then he bent down and crouched next to Cifa. If you want to beat Huji, you'll have to run even faster, the giant said. But I've never seen any human run as fast as you. You need to run faster, Cifa. Cifa was back at the starting line, next to Huji. Cifa was out of breath, his heart racing. He knew how fast he was running, but Huey was even faster. What was even more worrying was that Huey seemed to be winning so easily. He wasn't even out of breath. The big guy looked at Cifa and laughed again. Huey brought to mind Loki from the outer realms, prompting Cifa to wonder if the boy was Loki's son. Let's go. Let's go. They set off running. If ran faster than he had ever run before, as if the world were empty except for him and Huey. And Huey was always just ahead of him. When Huey reached the finish line, as if I was still 5 or 10 seconds away. I knew he was close to winning this time and that he had to give it his all. Let's have another race, he said, out of breath. Very well, Loki of the Outlands replied. You can race again if you like. You run pretty fast, but I still don't think you can win. How about we make this a winner-takes-all final? Huji walked over to the starting line, and Hi-Fi stood next to him. Hi-Fi could barely hear Huji breathing. Best of luck, Hi-Fi said. This time, I'm going to show you what I can do, said Huji. It was as if the words were coming from inside Cifa's head. Run, Loki of Outland called out. Cifa ran like an arrow, faster than anyone. He was like a falcon diving downwards, like a storm sweeping the land. He ran like he always did, and no one ran as fast as he did, not then, not ever. The Huggin easily caught up with him, and was even faster than before. Before SCF had even reached the halfway point, Hugin had already reached the finish line and was back again. That's enough. Loki of Outland let out a roar. They went back to the Great Hall. The giants were feeling even more relaxed and carefree now. I see, said Loki of Outland. It's probably understandable that you lost these to contest. But now, we're in for a treat. Next up is Thor, the god of thunder and one of the most valiant and impressive heroes. Thor, who has done some pretty heroic things and is celebrated throughout the 9 realms. Can you show us what you're made of? Thor looked at him. First of all, I can drink a lot, he said. There's nothing I can't drink dry. Loki from the outer realms took a moment to think. Of course, he said. Where is my cupbearer? The cupbearer stepped forward. Bring my special drinking horn, he said. The goblet bearer nodded and walked away. A moment later, he came back with a very long goblet. It was longer than any goblet Thor had ever seen. But he wasn't bothered. He was Thor, and he could drink from any goblet. The outside of the goblet was decorated with runes and patterns. This is the drinking horn of this castle, said Loki of the Outlands. We've all drunk from it here. The most powerful, strong and mighty can drink it in one gulp, while others, who are not quite as good, need 2 gulps to finish it. I can confidently say that no one here is weak enough to need 3 gulps to finish this horn. That would be a great disappointment. That was quite a long horn. But then, Thor was Thor. He raised the horn to his lips and started drinking. The giant's mead tasted cool and salty, but he downed it anyway, trying to drain the horn with one long gulp until he had to stop to catch his breath. He thought the horn should be empty now, but it was still as full as when he started drinking, or almost full. I thought you were really good at drinking, Loki of the Outlands said with a hint of sarcasm. But at least you can drink it all in one go. We can all do that. Thor took a deep breath, then brought the horn to his lips and took a long drink. He was sure he'd drunk it all, but when he lowered the horn from his lips, the liquid inside had only decreased by the height of a thumb. The giants looked at Thor and started laughing. Thor gave them a look that made them fall silent straight away. "Ahuffa," said Loki from outside. It seems that the legends about the mighty Thor are just that, legends. Even so, we'll give you another chance. You can give it another go and see if you can empty the horn on the 3rd attempt. There shouldn't be much left in it. Thor took a sip from the horn. He drank with the ease and grace of a god, taking his time and drinking deeply. Loki and Sif watched him with amazement. But when he put the horn down, there was only about a knuckle's depth of mead left. "I give up," said Thor. "I don't think that was even a little mead." Loki of Outland asked his cupbearer to bring the horn over to him. "Let's see how strong you are. Can you lift a cat?" he asked Thor. "What kind of question is that?" "Of course I can lift a cat." "All right," Loki of Outland said. "But we've all seen that you're not as strong as we thought. In Utgard, young men often practice their strength by lifting my family's cats. Just a heads up, they're much smaller than we are, and my cats are giants among cats. If you can't lift her, I'll understand completely." "I can absolutely lift your cat," Thor said. "She's probably asleep by the fire," Loki of the Outlands said. "Let's go and find her." The cat was curled up asleep, but when they walked into the room, she got up and walked to the middle of the room. The silver grey cat was about the size of a human, but Thor was stronger than anyone and reached out to hug her belly, trying to lift her above his head with both hands. The cat didn't seem to react much. She arched her back high, which made Thor have to stand as straight as possible. Thor wasn't going to be beaten at a game of cat lifting. He lifted as high as he could, and finally one of the cat's paws was raised. Just then, Thor, Sif and Loki heard a loud noise from far away. It sounded like huge rocks were rubbing against each other, like the mountain rocks were making a sound from the pain. "That's enough," said Loki of the Outlands. "It's not your fault you can't lift my cat, Thor. It's a giant cat, and you're the smallest and weakest of us giants." He smiled, showing his teeth. "The smallest and weakest," said Thor. "I'm supposed to wrestle one of you giants." Loki of the Outlands replied, "After what happened before, that would be out of line of me to let you wrestle with a real giant. You might get hurt. Besides, I don't think any of my team would want to wrestle someone who can't finish my horn of mead and lift my cat. I'll do my best to make it happen as you've requested. If you really want to wrestle, you can wrestle with my old wet nurse." "Your wet nurse?" Thor asked, sounding quite surprised. "Yes, she's getting on a bit now. She taught us to wrestle a long time ago, so I'm sure she'll be up for it. She's lost a bit of height with age, so she's probably not much taller than you. She used to play with the kids a lot." He looked at Thor and added, "Her name is Irai. She's beaten guys who looked much stronger than you. So don't underestimate her, Thor." "I'd rather wrestle your warriors," said Thor. "But okay, I'll wrestle your old mother first." They went to get the old lady, who arrived slowly, looking frail and worn, with a face full of wrinkles, shriveled and dry, as if a light breeze could blow her away. She was a giant, but only a little taller than Thor. Her head was covered in fine, dry, silky hair, which made Thor wonder just how old she was. She looked like she was well over the hill. He didn't want to hurt her. They stood facing each other. The first person to fall to the ground loses. Thor tried to move the old woman, but she was as solid as a rock. He tried to push her, trip her, or make her fall to the ground, but nothing worked. She kept looking at him, her colorless, aging eyes silent and unwavering. Then the old woman reached out and touched Thor's leg ever so gently. He felt his leg weaken instantly where it was touched. He pushed back against her, but she wrapped her arms around him and pushed him to the ground. He tried to push back, but it was no use. Before long, he was kneeling on the ground. "That's enough," Loki of Jotunheim called out. "That's enough, Thor. You're no match for even my old Manny. My team is more than a match for you." Thor looked at Loki, and then they both looked at Sif. They were sitting by the fire. Where the giants had been really welcoming, there was plenty of food, and the wine wasn't as fishy as it had been in the giant's horn before, but all three of them were quiet, and not at all like themselves at a feast. The three companions were quiet, a little embarrassed, and they were very humble because of their previous failure. At sunrise, they departed from Utgard's castle. The king, Loki of the Outlands, gave them a send-off. "Right, so what do you think?" Loki of the Outlands inquired, "How did you find my home?" They looked up at him, clearly annoyed. "Not very well," said Thor. "I always thought I was strong, but now I feel like I'm not as strong as I thought I was." "I also thought I was fast," said Sif. "I've never lost an eating contest before," said Loki. They walked past the last door of Loki's castle in the Outlands. "You know," the giant said, "you're not nameless and you're not useless. To be honest, if I had known that last night, I would never have invited you into my home, and I would never have invited you again. You see, I misled you all with some illusions." The three travelers looked up at the giant, who smiled down at them. "Do you remember Crimea?" he inquired. The giant: "That was me. I used an illusion to change my appearance and make myself look that big. My bag of supplies was tied with unbreakable wire and could only be opened with a magic key. And Thor, when you hit me with your hammer, I feigned sleep. I knew that the slightest blow could be fatal, so I used magic to move a mountain between you and me that invisible. Take a look over there." From a distance, there was a saddle-shaped mountain with several valleys between them, 3 square valleys. The last one especially deep, Loki of the Outer Realm said. "I used that mountain, and those valleys came from your divine power." Thor didn't respond. He bit his lower lip, his nostrils flared, but his red beard stood on end. Loki asked, "Was last night's incident in the castle also an illusion?" "Of course. Have you ever seen a wildfire? It roars down the valley, devouring everything in its path. You think you eat fast." That said, I've never seen anyone eat as fast as you." Loki's green eyes flashed with both anger and admiration. He hated being made a fool of, but he loved and admired the tricks of those who made fools of others. Loki of Outland turned to Heinze. "How quickly can you think, my boy?" he inquired. "Can you think faster than you can run?" "Of course," H replied. "I can think faster than anything. I asked you to race Huji because he's thought of as the fastest. You're undoubtedly the fastest man we've ever seen. But Sif, no matter how fast you run, you cannot outrun Thor." Sif didn't say anything. He was about to say something, like protest about the unfair race or ask a question, when Thor whispered his question. He spoke in a low voice, like the rumble of thunder from a distant mountain. "And what about me? What did I do last night?" Loki of the Outer Realms stopped smiling. "That's incredible. You've achieved the impossible. You couldn't see it with your own eyes. But the bottom of the horn you drank from is attached to the deepest ocean. You drank enough water to lower the entire sea, which caused the waves to rise. Thanks to you, Thor, the ocean will ebb and flow from now on. I'm glad you didn't take a fourth sip. You could have drained the ocean dry. The cat you tried to lift wasn't actually a cat. It was Jaelmonin, the serpent that surrounds the center of the world. It's impossible to lift the serpent of Midgard, and yet you did it. You even loosened one of its rings when you lifted one of the cat's paws off the ground. Do you remember the loud noise that happened at that time? That was the sound of the earth moving. And what about the old woman?" Thor inquired. "Your nanny, what about the old woman?" He sounded really gentle, but at that moment he was gripping the hammer handle in the way he knew best. "That's why, which means old age. Old age is unbeatable. It makes us weaker and weaker until it finally closes our eyes forever. It's true for all of us except you, Thor. You went up against old age, and we were impressed when you held your own. And when she really gave it her all, you only went down on one knee. We've never seen anything like it, Thor. I can say with certainty that this has never happened before. Now that we've seen your impressive strength, we realize it was a mistake to let you come to Utgard. I'll make sure I keep my castle safe in future. I'll make sure you never find it again, never see it again. No matter what happens in the future, you'll never be able to come back here." Thor raised his hammer, but before it could fall, Loki of Outland had disappeared. "Take a look," said Estif. The castle had also disappeared. Loki's castle in the Outer Realm had disappeared without a trace. The three travelers were now standing face to face on the deserted plain. "Let's head back," said Loki. "I must say, that was really well done. The illusion was spot on. I think I learned something today. I'll tell my sister that I raced Thor," said Sif. "And I'll tell Ross KVA that I'm fast." But Thor didn't say anything. He was thinking about the night before, and how he wrestled with the idea of old age and drunk from the ocean. He was thinking about the Midgard serpent. Once again, our story features three heroes exploring the mountains on the edge of Jotunheim. This time, our three heroes are Thor, Loki, and Heimdall. Heimdall is an old god who gave humans the gift of reason. Food is scarce in these dangerous mountains. The three gods are starting to feel peckish. Just then, they hear a mooing sound of a distant herd of cattle, and they smile at each other, because they know that they will soon have dinner. They walk into a green valley where there's plenty of life, with big oak trees and tall pines around meadows and streams. There they find a herd of cattle on the meadow, each one big and fat. They dug a pit and built a fire in it using wood. Then they killed one of the cows and buried it in the hot coals. They sat back and waited for the food to roast. After a while, they dug up the pit, but the meat inside was still raw and bloody. They gave it another go, lighting the fire once more, and they waited some more. This time, the meat in the pit was still cold, not even warmed by the fire. "Did you hear something?" Thor inquired. "What?" Heimdall inquired. "I didn't hear anything." "I heard it," Loki said. Listen carefully. They listened with great interest, and this time they heard the sound loud and clear. Someone was laughing at them, a hearty, cheerful laugh. The three gods looked around, but there was no one else in the valley except themselves and the herd of cattle. Then Loki looked up. An eagle was perched on the topmost branch of the tallest tree. It was the biggest eagle they'd ever seen, a giant among its kind. It looked at them and laughed. "Do you know why our fire isn't cooking dinner?" Thor inquired. "I think I know why," the eagle replied. "You look really hungry. Why don't you just eat raw? Eagles eat raw meat. We just tear it apart with our beaks." "But you don't have beaks, do you?" "We are really hungry," said Hyena. "Can you help us cook our dinner?" "I think," said the eagle, "that your fire has probably been enchanted in such a way that it sucks the heat and energy out of the fire. If you agree to share your cooked dinner with me, I'll get your fire going again." "We promise," said Loki. "Once the meat is cooked, we'll all have some, and you can take your share." The giant eagle spread its wings and flew over the meadow, its wings creating a strong wind, and the fire coals glowed in the flames. The three gods had to hold onto each other to keep from being blown away by the wind. The giant eagle only returned to the top of the tree slowly once it had done that. This time, they buried the meat in the fire pit with confidence and waited a while. It was summer, and in the north, the sun barely set. By the time they dug the pit open again, it was late, but it felt like daytime. As soon as the pit was dug open, the delicious aroma of the cooked beef filled the air, and the three gods couldn't wait any longer. As soon as the pit was dug, the giant eagle leapt down, grabbed the beef with its talons, and started eating it ravenously with its beak. Loki was furious. He watched as his dinner was devoured, and drove the eagle away with his spear. The giant eagle flapped its wings so hard that the air created almost made the three gods fall over. In doing so, it also dropped the piece of meat. However, Loki didn't get to enjoy his victory for long, because he noticed that the spear he'd used to stab the eagle was stuck in the giant eagle's body. When the eagle took flight, he was also taken up into the sky. Loki tried to let go of the spear, but his hands were stuck to the shaft. He couldn't let go. The eagle flew low, and Loki's feet were dragged along, over rocks and rubble, the foot of a mountain and the forest. It was obvious that some kind of spell was at work here, and it was stronger than Loki's. There was nothing he could do about it. "Case," he said. "Stop. You're going to dislocate my hand if you don't stop. My boots are a goner. You're killing me." The giant eagle flew up and around the mountain. They were now far above the land. "I might just kill you," it said. "Just let me down," Loki said, "and I'll do anything you want. Just tell me what you want." The eagle spoke up. "I want Hedda and her apples, the golden apples of youth." Loki was suspended in midair. All he could see was the wind, and the earth was 1,000 miles away. Eden was the wife of the god of poverty, Loki. She was gentle, sweet, and kind-hearted. She always had a box made of ash wood with her, which contained the golden apple. When the gods felt the effects of old age, such as grey hair or joint pain, they would visit Eden. She'd open her box and let the god or goddess who'd come along have an apple from it and eat it. They'd eat the apple, and their youth and strength would return. If it weren't for the apples of Jaidar's ill, the gods would cease to be gods. "You haven't answered me yet, have you? Do you want me to take you a little further? Over some rocks, a mountain peak, or something like that? This time, we could try crossing a deep river." "I'll get you the apples," said Loki. "I swear it. Just let me down." The eagle didn't say anything. It turned its wings and started to descend. In the green meadow below, a wisp of smoke from the cooking fire rose slowly. Thor and Heimdall were gaping at them, mouths open, as the eagle swooped down towards them. Loki realized he was falling as soon as the eagle flew past the fire. He fell into the meadow, holding the spear in his hands. The eagle soared up with a loud cry and was soon a small black dot in the sky. What on earth was that? Thor inquired. I've no idea, Loki replied. We saved you some food, said Heimdall. But Loki wasn't hungry, and his colleagues thought this was probably because of the dangerous battle he'd fought in the air. On their way back, everything was normal, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. The next day, Eden was strolling around Asgard, greeting the gods and checking out their faces to see how they were holding up with age. She ran into Loki. Loki usually ignored her, but this time was different. This morning he smiled and said hello. Eden, good to see you. I feel old, he told her, and I need your apple. You don't look any older at all, she said. That's because I'm keeping it under wraps, said Loki. Oh, my back is killing me. Growing old is a terrible thing, Eden. Eden opened her box of ash wood and handed Loki a golden apple from it. He ate the apple with gusto, swallowing the core whole. Then he pouted and made a sad face. I thought you had better apples, he said. This is unprecedented, replied Eden. She'd never been treated so coldly by anyone before. The gods had always been really complimentary about her apples and had been amazed by their ability to rejuvenate. Loki, these are the apples of the gods. They're the golden apples of youth, Loki said, looking doubtful. Maybe, he said. But I've seen apples in the forest that were better in every way than yours. They looked better, smelled better, and tasted sweeter. I guess those would be the golden apples of youth too. They might even be more youthful than yours. He noticed Eden's expression change a few times from disbelief to confusion to concern. My kind of apples are pretty special, she said. Loki gave a shrug. I'm just giving you my account of what I saw, he said. Eden went with him. Can you tell me where you saw these apples? She asked. You'll find them over there. I'm not really sure how to get there, but I could take you with me if you'd like. It's not far at all. She gave a nod of agreement. But how will we be able to compare the apple trees when we see them? Your wooden apple box is all the way in Asgard. You might say, these apples are better than yours. And I'd say, no way, Loki, these are wrinkled and rotten compared to mine. How will we know which is better then? Don't be silly, said Eden. I'll bring my apples. We'll do the comparison right there. That's a great idea, said Loki. Right, let's go then. Together they strolled into the forest, with Eden holding her box of ever-living apples made of ash wood. After walking for about half an hour, Eden said, Loki, I'm starting to wonder if there really are any apples like you said, or an apple tree. That's not very kind. It hurts, said Loki. The apple tree is right at the top of the hill. They reached the top of the mountain. Where's the apple tree? Eden inquired. There's only a pine tree that height with an eagle on it. Is that an eagle? Loki inquired. It's huge. As if it had heard them, the eagle spread its wings and flew down from the pine tree. I'm not an eagle, the eagle said. I'm the giant Shakai, transformed into an eagle. But I've come here to take the beautiful Eden. You'll be accompanying my daughter, Scotty. You might even like me in the end. In any case, the gods of Asgard are running out of time, and they're getting older. I have a prediction to make. That's what Shakai prophesies. It grabbed Edda with one claw and the box of ash apples with the other, and flew up into the sky. They were gone in no time, high above Asgard. So it was him, Loki said to himself. I knew he wasn't just any old hawk. He thought this to himself as he made his way back home. He was secretly hoping that no one would notice that Eden and her apple had disappeared. Even if someone did know, you were the last one to see her, said Thor, rubbing his right hand. What? How could it be me? Loki said. Why do you think that? Because you're the only one of us who hasn't aged, Thor said. I'm not the youngest, but I'm lucky, Loki said. I look after myself. Thor made a sound in his throat that was somewhere between a grunt and a growl. He didn't believe Loki for a second. His red beard was now a frosty white, with a few streaks of orange, like a flame that had once burned fiercely but was now cooling into a ball of ash. "Go on, give him a shot," Fraser said. Her long hair was now white, and her face showed the signs of aging. She was still attractive, but her beauty was now more that of an older, kind woman than that of a blonde maiden. "He knows where Eden is. He knows where the apple is." Her necklace, the Berising was still around her neck, but it was now dull and dirty and no longer shone. Bodin, the All-Father, grasped his staff with his bony, rheumatic fingers. His voice, which was once loud and commanding, now sounded weak and hoarse. "Don't hit him, Thor," he said in his usual voice. "As I thought. I had a feeling this was going to happen. At least you know right from wrong, Father of the Gods," said Loki. "I had no involvement in this whatsoever. I'd like to understand why Eden accompanied me. She doesn't even like me." "Don't hit him," Odin repeated, glancing at Loki with the good, grey eye that was deeply sunken. "I want him to be kept intact for the torture later. They're getting ready for it, lighting a fire to sharpen knives, gathering stones. We may be getting on a bit, but we're still more than capable of putting a man through his paces. We're still just as good at tormenting and killing as we were in our crime, back when the apples of Eden kept us young and undiminished." Loki noticed the smell of burning charcoal. "If I can work out what happened to Eden and get her and her apples back to Asgard safely, can we put this torture and killing on hold? That's your only way to stay alive," Odin said. His voice was so hoarse that Loki could hardly tell if it was the voice of an old man or an old woman. "Bring Eden back to Asgard, and the golden apples of youth." Loki gave a nod. "Can you get me out of here?" he said. "I'll get it done, but I'll need Freya's feather cloak." "My cloak?" Freya inquired. "Yes." Freya walked away, her hands holding a cape full of falcon feathers. Loki's shackles were removed, and he reached out and took the cape. "You can't just fly away and get away with it," said Thor, stroking his white beard thoughtfully. "I may be old," he said, "but if you don't come back, even in my old age, I will find you and wherever you hide, and my hammer will finish you off. I'm still Thor, remember? I'm still strong." "I think you're still a bit of a pain," Loki said. "Save your strength. You could use your godly powers to make a pile of wood shavings outside the Asgard walls. An enormous pile of wood shavings. You'll need to cut down a lot of trees, and then shave them into one big pile. I need a long, tall pile of shavings that goes all the way around the city walls. So you should get started right away." Loki put on his feathered cloak and transformed into a falcon, flapped his wings and took off. He flew faster than a real falcon and was gone in an instant, heading north towards the Frost Giants' territory. Loki's falcon flew until it reached the territory of the Frost Giants and the castle of the giant Shaggy. He sat on the roof and watched what was going on below. He watched the giant Shaka step out of his house and walk along the cobbled path by the water to a ship that was bigger than the biggest whale. Shaka pulled the ship into the cold water of the northern sea and started rowing with all his strength. Before long, he was gone. Loki then flew around the house in the form of a falcon, keeping an eye on every window. Through the iron bars of the farthest room, he saw Eden. She was sitting there, crying. He stopped at the bars. "Stop crying. It's me, Loki. I've come to rescue you." Eden looked at him through red-rimmed eyes. "It's you. You're the reason for all my problems," she said. "Well, maybe so. That was a long time ago, though. That was the Loki of yesterday. Today's Loki is here to rescue you and take you home." "How are you going to rescue me?" she inquired. "Do you have the apple with you?" "I'm the goddess of the Gods," she said. "Where I am, the apple is." She took out the box and showed him what was inside. "It's not a difficult problem," Loki said. "Just close your eyes for a second." She closed her eyes, and Loki transformed her into a chestnut with a shell and greenish outer skin. Loki grabbed the fruit with his claws, jumped over the window bars, and started flying home. Shakai's fishing trip didn't go as planned. The fish weren't biting. He thought it would be better to head back to Eden rather than waste any more time here. He thought he'd give her a bit of a tease and tell her that without her and her golden apple, the gods were already old and decrepit drooling, with trembling hands and feet, unable to stand steadily, and their minds and strength greatly reduced. He rode back to the castle and made his way to Eden's room, thinking these things. The room was empty when he got there. Shakai noticed a falcon feather on the floor. He immediately knew where Eden was and who had taken her. He turned into a giant eagle and flew up into the sky. This time, the eagle was huge, bigger than the biggest eagle he'd ever seen. He flapped his wings in the direction of Asgard. The earth was shrinking fast below him. The wind blew through his ears. He flew even faster, the sound of the wind in his ears. Shakai flew out of the land of the giants and into the realm of the gods. When he saw a falcon ahead, Shakai let out an angry hawk cry and picked up the pace. The gods of Asgard heard the shrill screech and the sound of the wings breaking the wind, so they all went to the high walls to see what was happening. They spotted the tiny falcon way off in the distance, flying towards them, while the huge hawk was chasing after it. The falcon was almost there. "Right now," Thor inquired. "Right now," Frasier replied. They got the fire going with the wood shadings that had been prepared in advance. At that exact moment, there was a loud bang and the shavings burst into flames. The flames rose like a volcanic eruption, reaching heights that surpassed the walls of Asgard. They were a terrifying and incredibly hot sight to behold. Shakai, in the form of a giant eagle, couldn't stop on a dime, nor could he slow down or change direction right away. He charged straight into the flames. The giant's feathers caught fire and his wings were scorched. A featherless seagull fell from the sky. With a loud crash that shook the walls of the gods, he hit the ground. The giant eagle was disoriented by the flames and in a state of shock, with its skin exposed. There was no match for the gods, even the elderly and feeble ones. Shakai was badly hurt and tried to change back into his giant form, but Thor's hammer killed him straight away. Eden was overjoyed to be reunited with her husband. The gods got their youth back after eating the apples again. Loki was hoping that would be the end of it. However, things didn't go as he hoped. Sif, Sigmund's daughter, put on her battle armor, grabbed her weapons, and went to Asgard to get revenge for her father. "My father was my world," she said. "But you killed him. His death has left me feeling sad and upset. I've lost all joy. I'm here to get revenge for his death, or at least some compensation." The gods of Asher and Shitati negotiated for a while about what form the compensation should take. Back then, every life had a price, and Shitati's was worth a lot. After a few rounds of back and forth, the gods and Shitati agreed on 3 payments to settle the matter of compensation for her father's death. The first thing they agreed on was that she would be given a husband to take the place of her late father. The gods could see that Shakti had a strong preference for Bull, who was the most handsome and beautiful god. She kept throwing him flirtatious glances until Bull blushed and looked away awkwardly. The second thing they agreed to was that the gods would have to make her smile again. She hadn't smiled once since her father was killed. The last thing the gods had to do was make sure her father would always be remembered. The gods would let her choose her husband as she wished. There was just one condition: she couldn't see the groom's face when she made her choice. All the male gods would be behind a curtain. She could only see their feet. Put another way, Skatai would have to choose her husband based on his feet. They walked past the curtain one after the other, and Skatai commented on the feet she saw. Not the best feet, she commented as each one walked by, until she stopped and said, "Oh my. These feet belong to my future husband," she said, with a smile. "They're the most beautiful feet I've ever seen. They must belong to Balder. He's got a great look about him. There's nothing ugly about him." Balder was indeed very attractive. But when Sigurd the Earth lifted the curtain, She discovered that the theat she had chosen belonged to Njord. He was the god of chaos and the father of Frey and Freya. She had married him. At the wedding feast, she looked sadder than any of the Ossa gods had ever seen her look before. Thor gave Loki a nudge, who was standing nearby. Go on, make her laugh. Ultimately, it's your fault. Loki let out a sigh. Is it really? Thor nodded and gave the handle of his hammer a meaningful tap. Loki shook his head helplessly. He went outside to the livestock pen. When he got back to the party, he was leading a big, grumpy male goat. The goat became even more annoyed when Loki tied a rope to its beard. At the other end of the rope, Loki tied it to his waist. He gave the rope a little tug with his hand. The goat let out a scream of pain as its beard was yanked, and it called back hard. The end of the rope was pulled hard against Loki's private part. Loki let out a scream and pulled back on the rope once more. The gods laughed. It wasn't hard to make the gods laugh, but this was definitely the funniest thing they'd seen in a long time. They even made bets on who would suffer first and be pulled off the goat's beard or Loki's groin. They laughed at Loki's screaming, like a fox howling in the night. Balder laughed, his voice ringing out. Loki sounds like a big, crying, useless baby. Balder's brother Hodor also laughed, even though he was blind. He still laughed every time Loki screamed. Scotty didn't laugh, but you could see a hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. With each bleat from the goat or scream from Loki, the corners of her mouth curved up a little more. Loki gave a little tug. The goat gave a little tug. Loki let out another scream and started to. The goat let out a loud bellow and pulled with even more force. The rope broke. Loki jumped up, grabbed his groin and fell into Scotty's arms, shaking with pain. Scotty couldn't contain her laughter any longer, and it broke out uncontrollably, like an avalanche in the mountains. She laughed so hard that her laughter echoed like a crack of thunder. She laughed so hard that tears glistened in her eyes. As she laughed, she reached out and squeezed the hand of her new husband, Njord, for the first time. Loki got up and walked away, covering his groin with his hands, looking at the gods with a sad and indignant expression, while they just laughed even louder. That's it, we're even, said Odin, the father of the gods, to Sef, the Jontes, after the wedding feast. There's just one more thing, he said, asking Scotty to follow him into the night sky. She went with Odin outside the banquet hall, with her husband in tow. By the remains of the giant's cremation, there were 2 glowing orbs. These 2 orbs, said Odin to Scotty, are the eyes of your father. The father of the gods kicked up the former eyes and hurled them into the night sky. There they burned and shone side by side. If you look up at the stars at the winter solstice, you can see these 2 shining stars. These are Shakai's eyes, and they are still shining in the night sky. Thanks for joining us on this relaxing journey. We hope you enjoyed today's sleep story. If you did, please like and subscribe to Dreamland Sleep Stories for more soothing stories. Thanks and have a great night.